Hello, this is Shannon Wallner, and today I'm going to be walking you through a migration or a modernization of the Informix stores demo. Before we get started, I want to point you to some resources that will be helpful to you after the presentation and hopefully allow you to just sit back and enjoy the presentation and know that a lot of the step-by-step information is already written down for you. If you go to the 4J's website under Company, you'll see an IBM i4GL to Genero section, which is what we have here. And up in the right-hand corner, you'll see the Stores Demo Example page. On this page, what we have is the step-by-step Stores Demo Modernization Example. You can download the whole thing as a PDF document or look at it in HTML by section. We also have it represented in a video series, so everything that's been covered today has been broken out into 5 different videos that might be helpful to you. And then the demos that we look at, you can actually run them from the web as well, and that's under the Demos tab if you want to look at those again after the presentation. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to first talk about sort of the 7 steps that we're going to look at today, 6 of the 7 actually. The first one is installing Genero, and I have it installed on a Linux server, and I'll be using a Windows front end, and it's already been installed and configured, so we're going to start with compiling the application. Once we've compiled the application, we're going to look at it in what we call text mode and also traditional mode and talk about why each of those might be an important phase to your modernization. And then you can run the application in graphical mode, and we'll look at that. Then at step 5, we'll talk about enhancing the application with Genero features. And this is really where you start to make a decision about what kind of modernization you're doing. Are you doing sort of a phase 1, quick and dirty, get it running in a graphical environment and make some nice tweaks? Or are you really looking at taking advantage of the Genero features that support a fully rich graphical user interface? And with that, you'll need to look at potentially designing your screens or redesigning to sort of fit the ergonomics of your user base that are now using a graphical product. Then we'll look at enabling the application for the web, and then we'll talk about managing reports or taking your legacy reports and actually running them, streaming them through the Genero reporting engine so that you can have an easy way to output your legacy reports to things like Excel and PDF. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and get started with the hands-on, and I'll show you the application and we'll just get started. So what I have here is a login to a Linux server, and I have Genero installed here, and I have a directory called 2E stores, and that just stands for Text User Interface Store. So this is my directory where I took all of the 4GL and .perf files from the stores demo and copy them into this directory. Also, you'll see here that there are some compiled files, so I've gone ahead and compiled the application. But before you can compile an application in Genero, you have to first extract the schema from the database. And the way that you do that is by using a utility called fgl-dbsch and a -db flag and then the name of your database. And when you do that, you're going to end up with a couple of files that start with the name of your database, and so store7 for us, and a stores7.sch file. Here's the schema file. And then we also have the attributes file, which would be the attributes that are in the database that we might be using as defaults. So once we have that, we can go ahead and compile. Now you might also notice in my directory that I have a make file. So just like in 4GL, compilation utilities like make can make things a lot easier. We could compile the individual files at the command line, and if we did that, we would be using the utilities, just like there was a utility in 4GL for compiling a form. In Genero, it's fgl form, and then the name of your per file. If you wanted to compile a 4GL file, you would use fgl comp and then the name of the 4GL file. You can also link them together into a program once you have your compiled modules, and away you go. But if we look at the make file, you can see that it's just like any other make file, except that we've listed out our the compiled form and module names. And then up here at the top, you can see the various utilities that are being used: FGL form, FGL comp, FGL run-L for linking, etc. Okay, so if I run make, it's going to show nothing to be done because I've already compiled it. And at this point, you're ready to run the application. Now, what I want to first show you is running the application in text mode. By default, Genero assumes you're going to run it in a graphical mode. So to run it in a text mode, we need to change the environment variable, FGL GUI, and set it to false or 0. And that just indicates that we want to run it in a text mode. Now I can use FGL run, which is the runner, to run the program, and I can use either stores or stores.42r since that's the name of my program as I defined it in that make file. And I'm going to go ahead and run it. And what I see here is the application just as we would be experiencing it in 4GL. So all the keyboard shortcuts work, the escape key for accept, etc. is all just exactly the same. Now at this point, there may be some customers that want to keep their text user interface, their ASCII screens, but take advantage of all of the language enhancements in Genero. So for example, you can now do dynamic arrays. You can also, when you compile, you have to think about your C libraries that you might have that you had in 4GL, or your C functions, and actually recompile them and link them into the Genero runtime system, or take a look at them and see what they're doing and see if the language now supports that functionality. So for example, lots of people had C functions for handling file management. We now have a channel class which includes all that functionality for file manipulation. So you could actually rewrite those C functions in BDL, in the business development language here in Genero, and have a much more efficient and portable application having done that. So at this point, you could just be keeping an ASCII interface and enhancing your code. But typically, you're going to want to see your application in a graphical environment. So I'm going to unset FGL GUI, and I'm going to run the program again. And this time, we'll see it in a graphical, how it comes up by default in a graphical rendering. Now, in order to do this, in order for it to come up in a graphical environment, I have to have on my client the Genero desktop client running. So this is the front-end software that's used to render the application. This has made the connection to the runtime system over here on the Linux server, and it handles the interpretation of all the objects that are getting built in the screen. And there's more detail on that in the white paper if you're looking to configure the Genero desktop client to run your application. But when the program comes up, you can see that the ring menu is now buttons. There's the text as it was described in the code. You can see that a few things are off. The borders aren't exactly right. This doesn't really fit into this frame any longer. And the reason for that is that the Genero desktop client renders the screen as best it can based on the information that it has. And in a graphical environment, you don't display things at a particular row and column as we had done in 4GL. Instead, you're displaying objects relative to each other and within that window and all the other frameworks that are used to build the window. So at this point, we could go ahead and start enhancing our forms and making things, thinking about how we want this title. We most likely would want to get rid of the magenta and get rid of the dashes and use some better visual labeling for our graphical application. However, if you want to see the application in a graphical environment but still keeping true to the traditional settings, the fixed settings of your form and your application, you can do something that we call setting your application to traditional mode. And the way that you do that is by setting a runtime configuration parameter to traditional. So I've created a little file here called demo.prf, it just stands for profile there, and it's just one line in there, and it's GUI.UI mode equals traditional. Now what I can do is tell the runtime system that at runtime I want you to pick up the information from this file. And so we have a runtime configuration file called FGL profile. And so if I set that environment variable to my new file, PRF here, and then I'll export FGL profile. Now when I run the program, I should see it come up in traditional mode. And here you can see it's using a fixed font. And when we go into the customer form, we can see that everything lines up. All of our borders and everything are the same. It doesn't look completely graphical, but it does stay true to the form's original settings. Okay, so for some customers, this might be another phase complete. In other words, it's running in a graphical environment. Users can access it in a graphical way, but the program itself has not changed. The forms stay fixed to how they were in the ASCII or text interface. Okay, so we call that traditional mode. All right, so I'll go ahead and unset FGL profile. And now what I want to show you is I'm going to go over and show you an example of an application that has been enhanced a little bit so that we can talk through some of those enhancements. So I'm just going to open another window, and this directory, which has the same files from the TUI stores, but the enhanced one, is my GUI stores directory. And you can see here that there's lots of 4GL and PER files as well here. And I also have a make file and my schema information, etc. So let me go ahead and run this program, and we'll talk about some of the changes and how we would go do those. All right, so here we have, just to close these, here we have the enhanced application, and you can see off the bat that we've gotten rid of the magenta. We've got some bold happening here. When we go to the customer form, we can see that we've got a little toolbar added, that our fields have been realigned. We can also see as we move through the program that we have some yellow font highlighting the focus of the field. And we also have a little pop-up window. So for the state field, we've enhanced that so the user can pop up the list of all the states. Now the nice thing about using what's called a table container, which is housing all this data, is that the user can actually move the columns around. They can sort. They can also choose to show or hide a particular column. Okay, so there are lots of options there with the table container. So let's just take a look at the form so that we can get a sense of how simple some of these changes are to make. Now at this point I could pull up the form right from here. So if it's the, let's see, cust form, and we could use VI and I could walk you through all the changes to the form file that are here. But instead of working in VI, I'm going to show you Gennaro Studio, which is the graphical development environment that comes with Genero. So this is a free product that comes with your license to Genero that you can download and use, and makes creating and debugging and compiling everything so much easier. You can still do everything at the command line if you'd like, or you can move to Studio. So I don't have an application set up here. Instead, I've just linked in all the files so that we can look at those in the text editor, which is a really nice visual way of looking at the files. So the first file that we want to look at is our old form. So here's our old form, just as you'd recognize it in 4GL. And the enhanced form looks like this. And let's just talk through some of the changes. First of all, you'll notice that the toolbar section, which was creating our toolbar, is just a section in the form. You can have it as part of the form, or you can have it as part of the interface or the window that the forms are loaded into. This one is bound to the form, and you can see it's a toolbar section here with each of these items being bound to a particular action in the code. So our accept and cancel actions, which are default actions for every interactive dialogue, are being used here. We could also add a top menu in the same section in the next section if we wanted to, and we would set that up in a similar way. Okay, so toolbars and top menus are supported. In the next section is where we see some bigger changes. Instead of a screen section, we've changed that to use a layout section. And the layout section really does two things. First of all, using the keyword layout indicates that you can access and use all of the various containers and widgets that are part of Genero. So, for example, table containers and folder containers and what we call tree view containers. You can also then access all the widgets, such as radio buttons and groups and spin edits and sliders and all sorts of nice widgets. You can see here in our grid section, which the grid section sort of replaces the screen section, we still have the curly brackets, but here we've just left justified all of the fields and all of the labels so that everything will just render left justified on the form. Then down in the attributes section, each of these edit fields work just the same way as they did in 4GL. We could use the keyword edit to indicate that this is an edit field, but if there's nothing there, it assumes an edit field. And you'll see we've added for the state field a button edit. So we've changed it from an edit field to a button edit field. And by doing that, we can set up that little widget that allowed us to specify an action that also had an image. So it was the action, the state field had a little magnifying glass, and when we click on that, it brought up a window. Now this Z state is this action is what binds this widget to the code. So if we open up the code and take a look at one of the interactive dialogues, let's try input here, we'll see that in the code we have on state or on action Z state. And that's saying when the user is in this input block, the Z state action is enabled, and when they click on it, the state help function is called. And if we just peeked at the state help function, we'd see that it's, opening the window and displaying the form and displaying the array of data that we were loading into it. All right, so a button edit or any widget that can associate with an action, that action name is what is bound in the code and to your form. All right, the other thing I want to show you is the state list per file, and it is also using the layout keyword to take advantage of the new capabilities, and it's using a table container. And by using the table container here, for this form, we're able to have all that nice functionality that a table provides, the sorting and the moving of the columns and the hiding and showing of columns. Now all that you can turn off if you wish, but those are some default functionality of a table container. You'll also see that the layout section can take attributes. The state selection this text becomes the window title, and the style is the style being chosen for the window. So a window object can have lots of different styles. We include a bunch of styles, but you can also write your own. And it's simply a matter of using the attributes, setting up the attributes that you want for a window. So maybe you don't want a window to be able to be closed, or you want it to not have the minimize button, or you want the menu bar to be down in the bottom of the screen instead of to the right. All those things can be handled by the window style. This one's using something called Dialog 4, which just has some functionality that is good for this particular type of pick list or pop-up window. Now, talking about styles, let's look back over at our code for a minute, and you might have noticed that we went ahead and commented out in the code all the attribute statements that were identifying borders or colors. You'll see at the top, I think we had, here's where we're getting rid of the attribute magenta. Okay, so we need to pull that out of the code simply because we want to use styles to handle the color and style definitions of those objects. So to handle styles, as you noticed, we had a bold weighted labels, and we had edit fields that were in sort of that navy blue color. And to do that, we work in an XML file that's called a style file, and we can just set up the styles that we want for our application. That way we can have control over the style for every label or style for every widget. We can also, for example, this label, all labels are going to be bold, all edit fields are going to be dark blue, but we can also specify conditional type styles by saying every edit field, when it has focus, has these style attributes, and in this example it's just setting it the background color to yellow. So you can also set up specific styles that then the widget itself calls. So you could have a style set up in here that's called perhaps edit, maybe it's an important, and having something like that, if you created in your form a particular edit field and you specified that its style was important, only that particular edit field would get the important style. Okay, so that shows you some of the simple enhancements, but I want to not let you think that there's not a whole another world of enhancements once you're in Genero that you can't access. The point I want to make here is that Genero supports your design. So at the point that you're looking at maybe redoing your screens for a graphical environment, design those and then look to Genero to support that, because we do support all the graphical widgets, the containers, and you can have a really, really enhanced application. So some of the more interesting or bigger type of enhancements that you might be interested in are things like drag and drop. Okay, so this is two display arrays, two lists that the user can drag and drop between the list or between the two lists. And this is in what we call a multiple dialog application, meaning that both of these display arrays are open at the same time. The user doesn't have to first accept or cancel the activity in one before moving to another. So you can sort of think of having your whole form open at the same time as opposed to having just one section, making them complete the information there before they move on to the next section. Also, multi-row select is supported, so the user can click on more than one row, and then we have some functions that allow you to easily scan through the data and see which of the rows were selected. We also support rich text formatting. So if you're using a text edit widget, it's important to note that you can have full functionality. In other words, you can have a formatting bar, you can integrate spell checking, you can have find and replace. You can also supports HTML, so you can also have links. You know, if the user types a link into this text edit, that it would look like a link. It would be blue and underlined, and when the user clicks on it, it would open a browser and show the link. We also support tree views, so this would be this sort of folder system style container. And what's nice about this type of container is it's a nice way to show a lot of information without cluttering up the whole screen. But also, each of these folders or each of these nodes in the tree can be expanded and collapsed, and there's an action associated with that. So when the user expands, clicks on this, you could have an action triggered that they're expanding it and what you want to have happen, as well as collapsing it. So for example, you could be showing the count for all of the number of songs in each of these folders, but only do you load them when the user double clicks on one of those folders. We also support picture flow, which is a style on the table container, which allows you to show a set of images and display them in such a way that the user can scroll through the images. So this can be a really nice enhancement if you have part of your application that is image heavy or helps the user navigate or find something that they need. And that's simply a style on the table, and so when that table is rendered, those images will be rendered in this way. And lastly, just to point out that we support web components, and web components are third-party tools, so third-party components that you can seamlessly integrate into your form. So in this form, you can see that there's some standard edit fields and things that look very familiar. This chart area here, this is actually a widget on the form that is of type web component, and its web component is pointing to a particular web component from Fusion Charts, which is allowing you to utilize all the functions from that web component in order to create this really nice charting. So you can, there's lots of different web components, from mapping to graphics to graphs to other sorts of geopositioning. There's lots of different web components, and so it seamlessly works within the application, but again is really tapped into a whole nother set of functionality. So that just gives you an idea on some of the sort of larger enhancements that you might look, which is why I make the point that really your spec of your new application will be supported by Genero, as opposed to trying to force feed different new features into your application. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about, let's close this up and let's start talking about compiling your application, or I'm sorry, not compiling your application, but configuring your application for the web. So we have a running application. We've made some enhancements to it. Now we want to see that application running on the web. What we're going to need to do is work with some configuration files. And let me just go over to another window that I have open. This one is the GAS or GAS. It's the Genero application server. So it's installed as well on this server. And in the GAS directory, you'll see that there is a bunch of subdirectories. One of them is Etsy. And in the Etsy directory, you'll see that there is a set of files. And XCF stands for the configuration file. So the main configuration file is the as.xcf file. But I don't usually like to edit the original files, so I've created a new as.xcf file. Excuse me, and that's the one that I'll be showing you. So I just have a copy of these over here in Studio, so it's easier for us to look at them. The as.xcf file is an XML file, and you can see if I expand its structure that it's got a whole bunch of different sections. And the first thing that we need to do for configuring our application for the web is to configure the Informix information. In other words, we need to tell it the information about the environment variables for Informix. Now, the Genero application server works with the web server to serve up the pages. So we're telling it all the information about the database, and then we're going to tell it all about the application. So you can see here the FGL, DB path, Informix dir, Informix server, et cetera, all those are set up. And again, this is all written out in the white paper on what those environment variables are and how to set them. So actually I should open the new as.xcf one there. Okay, so we're all set up and set for Informix. The next thing we want to do is tell the application server about the program that we're wanting to run. And for that, we go into a different directory, which is the apps directory, or app directory, and we list out any, or create configuration files for any applications that we want to, or versions of applications that we want to run. So if we look at one of those files, we can see that it is, again, an XML file that has a really simple structure. It can get more complex depending on what you're doing, but this one is just simply saying we want to run this particular program that's located in this directory, and the application parent, this default GWC, this is what is actually in the main configuration file, this one here. So it tells us, we get to pull all that information about the sort of style or theme of the application that we're running. So we're using the default GWC parent and then telling it what application we're running. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and see our application running. But we have to have the Genero application server itself running. So let me go into the Etsy directory, and I need to start the Genero application server. So I use HTTP dispatch -f and the name of my file. So remember, I have a modified file. And it goes ahead and starts the application server. Now, something to note also, Genero ships with a standalone application server, so that you don't have to have it configured to your web server just to either look at an application as it would be in a browser, or to work on in a development mode before you're ready to have it served out to the internet. So we've got the application server running. Now we need to open our browser, and we need to point to the URL that specifies that configuration file that we created for the application. So I have a link that I set up. There's my customer form. And it pulls up our application using the default GWC parent, remember, so the way that it's being rendered is based on this default setting. And you can see that my URL points to the IP address and the port number we're listening on. So that 6394 is the default. So my application server and my is listening on that port from this particular box. So then I can just run through the application and see how it looks. Everything is functional. You can see there's my styles. We can also go ahead and update and open up our little pick list as well. Okay, so we can see how the application works by default, and then we can make some decisions about enhancing it. Now I want to show you another, let's open this here, another configuration file for the same application. So if I open this one, I'm going to see here's this execution section, same application to run. But the output section has some additional info. So we've got this DUA AJAX. In other words, if you detect user agent is AJAX, that's a standard browser application, then I want you to look for the picture, any picture that I reference in the My Files directory, and I want you to use a template that is called main2.xhtml. Okay, so in the main2.xhtml file, if we open that, if you have any familiar with XHTML, this might look familiar to you. Your web people will find this very familiar. But we can go in here and we can make, special changes to how the application is rendered in the XHTML. So for instance, in the body, we're setting a style of background color to this particular RGB value. And this particular XHTML file, let's see if I can find it, also references a CSS file, which is a cascading style sheet. So, and when this is served up from the application server, the browser picks up the theme as well as the cascading style sheet information, and we can see that it's mentioned in this XHTML file. So our CSS looks like this, and you can see that we're identifying some color information for a label, and in the documentation it could tell you all the specific elements in a CSS and how you, the Genero elements that you can put in a CSS to change the styles of them. All right, so let's go ahead and try running GWC2 from the browser. So all I need to do is change this to a 2 because it would be the other configuration file that I want to use. And when I run that, I see the same application, but you can see that the colors and the background, everything are quite different. And I can go ahead and still do the same things I did before, but we have a little different look and feel. Now, the demos that we have for you on the website, here's the AJAX one. If you run that, you can see that it's even enhanced a little more. It's got a picture across the top and some other, if we look at the customer form, their application has a more detailed toolbar and a top menu. that's been added in the application in the form. Okay, so but if we go back and look at our application that we were running, let's run this one here. It's important to note also that we can run the applications using different themes that are already defined for you. And one of those themes is Silverlight. And so if you want to run the application as a Silverlight enabled application, you can see how it looks and how it renders. Oops, let's go to query again. And so you get the idea that a very different look and feel running under Silverlight than running under Ajax. It's also important to mention here that your mobile, you can run these applications in a mobile environment through the browser, just as you did with Ajax. Let's take this off. Okay, so this would be a browser-based application that could also run on a mobile device. But if you're interested in iPhone, I've just linked here to the iPhone documentation. So you can see that the iPhone rendering is also just a theme. And so its theme is very specific to an iPhone application. And so this documentation gives you some information about how that theme works, how your application needs to be set up, what works best in an iPhone environment, etc. So you can use that theme to run your application on an iPhone. Now on an iPhone or an iPod, you can still run a Safari-based or browser-based application, but certainly customers now are wanting to create a specific app that's using the true iPhone ergonomics. Okay, so again, working in the Genero web client or working with the Genero application server, enabling your applications for the web is really a matter of configuration than it is any coding changes. So you're still going to want to put the bulk of your work into the user interface. If you're going to be working with a web application, you're going to want to either work with people in your company that have those skills with CSS and JavaScript and XHTML and that sort of a thing, where you can still stay focused on the actual business logic and code and perhaps the way in which the forms work. All right, so the last thing to show you today is reporting. And what I want to show you in reporting is simply how you can take your legacy reports and run them through the Genero reporting engine so that you can output them to PDF or Excel. So here's our report, our modified report module. And the report that I want to look at is the accounts receivable report. So this is the one that we've enhanced to run through the Genero reporting engine. If we come down here to where the report starts, you can see that there are some new functions being used to call the reporting engine configuration information, and on this line 174 we can specify what sort of device to output the report to. And again, this is written up in that white paper if you want to add this code to your own programs. So this is set to PDF. Let's go over to our application and see if we can run that. Whoops. Okay, so if we click on Reports and Accounts Receivable, we can see that the report, so this one is set up to run in Excel. So let's just change that and see it come up in PDF. Let's exit that. And we will open the D4.4GL. Since the Gennaro Studio, I just have copies of the files in there, so I want to actually make the change here in the file that's being pulled up. So there's the XLS reference. I'm going to change that to PDF. I also need to recompile, but let me show you in the make file that this make file also includes a reference to the libgre.42x. So it's the library that has all that new functionality for the Genero reporting engine. And I'll go ahead and, whoops, make, and then let's run it. Stores is the name of the application. And we'll go to the accounts receivable, and we'll see the report come up in PDF. Okay, so a couple lines of code added to the report block and linking in this new library for the reporting engine gives you lots of functionality with just your legacy reports. Now that's not to say that any new reports or enhanced reports that you want to create can't be created in Genero. In fact, the Genero report writer has a full graphical front end for designing and laying out the report design, allowing you to have really feature-rich reports that just weren't a possibility with a 4GL or with our legacy systems. All right, so on that note, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the webinar. We do have a Q&A document that we will send out that has answers to the questions that have come in during the webinar in the chat area, and we will go ahead and link that to the same page where this replay of the webinar is located. Thank you so much for your attendance. On the screen here, you can see if you have any questions about sales and licensing, you can contact Joe Golden. And if you have any technical questions, you can contact Laurent Gallet or one of his team members at helpdesk.us@4js.com. Thanks so much, and have a great day.